Chapter 1, Room Tone. At night the studio felt like it was remembering something. Elena liked it most at that hour, when the lights were low and the panels on the walls drank the last of the day's noise. The main room was modest, 2 monitors, a sleeping console, the familiar slope of faders like a small landscape under her hands. Acoustic foam in tidy triangles. A window looking into the recording booth, where a single hanging mic glowed with the quiet patience of a porch light. She turned on only what she needed. Lamps, not overheads. Soft, not bright. The city could blink out there. In here, the dark had edges she knew. She put the kettle on the little hot plate and waited while the element found its hum. The air held the gentle dust smell of old foam, old wood, old fabric. She could taste the day's coffee in the air, faintly bitter. When the water sighed, she poured it over a tea bag and cupped the mug to warm her fingers. On nights like this she spoke to no one. She listened to things that didn't have voices, wires, glass, the tiny breath a computer takes before the fans start to turn. People could lie. Waveforms, never. She logged in, pulled up a project from the shared drive, and set the timeline to inch along at real time. This one was an archival job from a small conservatory, a reel taken, they thought, sometime in the late 70s. A cello, a pianist just behind it, a room that had not been designed for recording but did its best. The digitization notes were sparse, tape brittle, noise floor elevated, musician unknown. She liked that, unknown. She always imagined some ordinary night decades ago, someone in a sweater leaning into music with no idea a stranger would hear them far in the future and tidy their sound like a caretaker smoothing sheets. She clicked play. Tape hiss rose like a curtain. The cello entered, dark and close, with that sweet rawness you only get when the bow is still finding the string. A pianist followed, in profile, careful to breathe in the rests. Elena closed her eyes, as she often did for the first pass, the better to feel where the noise lived and where it could be coaxed to leave. She let the first movement play through untouched. Let the room introduce itself. You don't walk into a place and immediately rearrange the furniture, her first mentor used to say. You look, you listen, you sit for a moment and let the walls tell you what they're holding. She made a small note, 60-cycle hum, mild, broadband hiss, moderate, bump at 180 Hz when pianist shifts pedal. She took a sip of tea. She breathed in for 4, held for 7, let go for 8. The kettle's heat drifted away. The night pressed closer to the window. She rewound to the beginning and listened again, not to the music, but to the air around the music. The silence between notes. The old reel had its own weather, faint, steady, familiar. Room tone, she thought. The particular hush of this recording space. Some rooms are bright, some soft. This one had a long, patient exhale. She drew another slow breath and started making surgical passes. A gentle notch for the hum. A little multiband to tame the hiss without strangling the cello's breath. A few careful D-licks where the tape clicked. She preferred small adjustments, many of them, to any one dramatic sweep. This was not a performance she was trying to modernize, this was a memory she was trying to keep from fading. Minutes dilated. She didn't look at the clock. The only measures that mattered were bars and beats and the way the sound under her hands softened when she asked nicely. Halfway through the second movement she heard something that didn't belong, and she stilled. It was nothing, she told herself. Just the bow hair catching at the frog. Just the pianist shifting on a bench that had lived a long life and kept all the creaks. She let it ride. She listened again. It didn't repeat. The music filled in around it, the way waves erase one small footprint and pretend it was never there. She exhaled. The room received it. She took another note, more out of habit than worry, unidentified transient under cello line, investigate on pass 3. Then she let the file roll to the end, where someone in that other room decades ago had laughed quietly, and a chair had scraped, and a door had closed with the soft finality that doors have when people respect them. Her tea had gone lukewarm. The night had gone deeper. She did not feel tired. She felt present, in that clean way that comes when all attention has found one task and decided it will stay. On her way out, she did what she always did. She stepped into the booth, stood very still, and recorded 1 minute of nothing. Room tone. A true minute. No cough, no sigh, no shifting of weight. In the file, later, it would look like a low fur of sound. She liked having it. A breath of the space to lay under everything else. The first layer of a bed. She saved her work. She shut off the lamps one by one. The studio, obliging, gave back the dark as gently as it had borrowed it. Outside, the city's January cold pressed the air thin and bright. Her car made its tired click when she locked it. At home, she took a shower hot enough to make her skin sing, ate an apple slowly in bed, thumbed through a book without retaining a single sentence. She left the window open just enough to let in the hum of the street, distant tires, a lone siren far away, the steady hush of air through trees stripped bare. She counted 4 in, 7 hold, 8 out until her body believed her. She slept, very lightly, as if she had only stepped into the shallow end of a pool and kept one foot on the tile. Somewhere in the first hour, a thread of sound laid itself down beside her on the pillow and matched her breathing. She dreamed of sheet music without staves, just small marks in the air that made sense only while she was looking, and the moment she glanced away they scattered like dust in a shaft of light. When she woke, just before dawn, the dream left without closing the door. The morning was a clean slate. The quiet felt kind. She made tea. She wrote herself the day's list in a square, patient hand. And between return edits to conservatory and invoice, week 2, she added a line, transient under cello, listen again. She didn't draw a box around it to check later. She let it be a line by itself, a small string in a larger weave. The city woke up 3 floors below her. Buses exhaled. Someone laughed into a phone. Somewhere a radio played an old song and then remembered to turn itself down. The day moved forward in easy increments. Nothing broke. Nothing insisted. Elena did her work like she always did, quietly, with care, with the long attention of someone who finds comfort in tiny adjustments. Night would come again, the studio would darken, and the room would remember. For now, morning. She let it be morning without asking it for anything. Chapter 2, a whisper under the bough. By the time she turned the studio lamps on again, the day had set all the way and the big room had folded itself into its own shape. The booth window was a calm rectangle, the console stood in a thoughtful slant, the chair made the small sound chairs make when someone sits who always sits exactly the same way. She likes what likes her back, Elena thought, and smiled, and put water on to heat. She opened the project. Took a breath. Set the playhead just before the moment she had marked. She rested her hands lightly on the keyboard, as if she could feel sound through her fingertips before it entered her ears. The cello's first note bloomed. The room offered up its hiss like an offering. The pianist breathed in, breath out. That night's air had a certain thickness, so the hiss wore a warmer coat, but it was the same animal. She listened for the thing that had made her note. 10 seconds. 20. There, a soft slip under the cello line no one would notice unless they were not looking for music at all, but the skin under music. She rolled back 3 seconds. Listened. Again. Listened again. She marked the range, a sliver of a second. On the display, it looked like a small ripple had moved through a pond and then calmed itself, with only the faintest ring left. She pulled up a spectral view. Colors told stories a line sometimes failed to tell. The cello glowed where it ought to glow. The hiss was a low cloud. And there, tucked between, something thin and very human-shaped, an exhale, not the pianist's, not the cellist's, not the floorboard, not the air conditioner. She paused. Not from fear, but from the strange little thrill of a puzzle that politely raises its hand. She isolated a narrow band. Lifted it a few decibels. Pressed play. The cello sang. The room held itself steady. And in the little valley between 2 notes, a sound rested like a small shell at the beach line, an intake, soft, and then the ghost of a syllable. If the day had been windier, if she had slept fewer hours, she might have blamed imagination. But she felt rested. Her hands were steady on the desk. Her breath was slow. She rolled again. This time she knew exactly where to listen. There, like someone close by, just to the right of her shoulder, trying not to disturb the player and failing by the width of a whisper. Elena. It was not a word. It was almost the end of a name, and of course it could have been anything else, even, ever. The mouth makes many shapes and the ear sometimes remembers them wrong. She exhaled a breath she hadn't meant to hold. She rubbed the bridge of her nose with a finger and smiled at herself, the indulgent smile of a person who sees her mind doing the thing minds do and chooses not to punish it. You want a story, she said quietly, not to anyone, exactly. You want a ghost in an old tape. She set the game back where it belonged. She made her careful passes, little clicks mended, hiss smoothed, room respected. She let the music be music, which is to say she did not ask it to be more than it already was. On the second pass, later in the same movement, it came again. Not the way a roof creaks when the temperature drops, not the way a pianist sighs when they think no one is listening. A whisper that had learned where to sit to be heard. She flinched, then felt the flinch ebb. The motion had been small. The sound had been small. Nothing in the room had changed. The light on the hanging mic was its same good porch lamp glow. The computer fan breathed the breath of all computers everywhere. She lifted one ear cup away and pressed it flat against her collarbone so she could hear the world in one ear and the recording in the other. Out here, the air was as simple as it had been the night before. In there, a vowel had tilted toward her as if to ask if she was listening. She wrote another note, possible breath/phoneme? Check with spectral, crossref with tape bias artifacts. She considered sending a quick message to the conservatory. Did anyone off mic speak? Any notes about studio audience? But no one answered those late, and besides, she did not want to invite an explanation until she had asked more careful questions. She set a marker in the timeline, gave it a name, Wisp_1, as if by naming it Wisp she could make it smaller. She found 2 more, minutes apart, each the smallest grain of a human mouth opening. She aligned them and noticed a kindness, they did not fall on any note that mattered. Whoever had breathed had done so between phrases, at the edges, as though trying to leave the music undisturbed. Elena had a small habit that comforted her. She spoke to the file on the last pass before she broke for tea or for a minute of standing and looking through the window at nothing at all. Okay, she told it, a teacher to a polite class. That's enough for now. She stood. She stretched gently, hands above head, shoulders soft. She walked into the booth and set a glass of water on the music stand, though she did not need water, though no one but she drank it. It felt kind to set a thing down where a musician's hand would expect it. Small rituals built slow rooms. On her way back to the chair she paused, listening with her whole body the way animals do when they feel the electricity change. The studio did not shiver. The air remained the same temperature it had been. The light didn't decide to fail. She smiled at herself for pausing, and she sat. When she pressed play again, she kept her hands away from the controls and let the file run. The whisper did not appear in its earlier places. Good. Perhaps the small illusions of fatigue had found their place and gone to sleep. She let the movement complete. She let the third begin. The cello dug deeper, the pianist followed like a shadow does when it has learned the person. Elena's pulse found the music's long line and lay along it, not perfectly, but in a way that felt companionable. Then, at a place she had not marked, past the piano's leaning chord, under the tail of the bow, the quiet parted like curtain cloth moved by a hand. Elena. Her name, this time, all of it, not loud, not even certain, a breath pressed into 2 small syllables and then allowed to fade so gently that if she had looked down, if she had had the thought to scratch her wrist, she might have missed it, and it would have been as if it had never been said at all. She closed her eyes. She did not press stop. She let the movement play to the end. She felt the chair under her, the particular give of the cushion where she always sat. She felt the floor under the chair. She felt the way holding still makes sound take a step closer. It is not my name, she told herself kindly. It is noise that my mind wants to make meaningful. It is the shape of two notes that happen to touch and my own tiredness filling in a blank. When the last chord floated away, someone on the tape laughed again, soft and happy, as if they had forgotten the record button was still down and had remembered, mid-laugh, and tried to hide it. The door closed softly. The tape hiss learned how to be silence again, and then, out of duty, continued to hiss because silence on tape is never quite silence. Elena took the headphones off and set them down as carefully as she could without making it a ceremony. She took a sip of water she did not need. She watched the green numbers in the corner of the screen inch forward until the counter said, plainly and without flourish, that the file had reached its end. And in that small seam between the end of a thing and her decision to begin another, the room offered up a whisper so gentle she almost mistook it for the sound of her breath moving past her own lips. Elena. She looked up, not sharply, just as if someone had called from the far end of a hall and she wanted to be polite. No one was in the booth. No one in the hall. The mixed small light maintained its good glow. The kettle sat cool. The building held still, the way animals do when the weather is fair and they know it. She did not say hello. She did not say who's there. She did not ask a room to talk back. Instead she pressed the talkback button, the one that would carry her voice into the booth if anyone were there to need it, and she said in a voice she would have used with a skittish animal, "We're almost done for tonight." She released the button. She set a fresh marker, wisp_2. She saved. She closed the project, not as flight, not in fear, but to place a gentle hand on the edge of the hour and say enough like a kindness. On her way out, she didn't record room tone. She stood in the booth doorway and simply listened. The sort of listening that makes the lungs slow down. The sort that loosens a jaw. There is a hush to every built space. Even empty, it isn't empty. Old wood talks in its sleep. Air makes quiet wires hum. Everything made by hands remembers the hands. In that hush, something like her name sighed the way a very tired person sighs after they have put away the last dish. She locked up. The hallway lights clicked off behind her on their timer and made that tiny metallic sound all timers make, a polite tick that insists on being noticed even as it apologizes for existing. Outside, the street was the same street as always. The cold slipped in under her sleeves and made her elbows feel awake. A bus sighed. A man laughed into a phone in a language she did not speak. A dog's collar chimed once like a small bell and then became a quiet dog again. In the car, she did not turn the radio on. She let the heater find its slow breath. She leaned her head back at the red light and closed her eyes and counted in for 4, held for 7, let go for 8, and did this until the light remembered it could change. At home she folded into her nighttime rituals the way a person returns to a chair that always faces the same window. Shower, soft shirt, apple, a few pages of a book she was not keeping but liked to touch. She did not think of the tape. She did not think of the room. She allowed her mind its small corners, the color the sky makes right before it concedes to night, the weight of her grandmother's old wool blanket, the faint eucalyptus the drier sheets left behind that she pretended to dislike and secretly enjoyed for how it made her sheets smell like someone had wished her rest. She lay on her side. The radiator ticked as if counting. The apartment upstairs set down a glass very gently on a table. A siren far away remembered it was a siren and then remembered it could be quiet again. Her breath was slow. She didn't need to count. All the numbers counted her without help. Somewhere close, not in the walls, not in the room, not in the air, but near to all those places, something like the idea of a whisper moved. Not at her. Not for her. Just a shape that sound sometimes takes when it is thinking about becoming language and hasn't yet decided. She let it be there without deciding for it. She closed her eyes. She slept lightly, as she always did, the way anyone who loves sound sleeps, as if sleep were a soft door left on the latch, and any small noise, if it needed to, could come in. Morning would be soon. There were only a few more hours to be night. And if the night had words she thought were hers, they were small, and they were not in a hurry. Chapter 3, When Silence Isn't. Elena had always liked the first few minutes in the studio, before she touched anything. The small ritual of turning lamps on one by one. The hush of the room tone finding its place. The quiet tick of the kettle heating on the side table. That hush was a comfort, until she realized it wasn't empty anymore. She set her bag down, rolled her shoulders, and pulled up the project. The cello line waited in its place on the screen, calm and patient as ever. She slipped her headphones on, not with eagerness but with the faint hesitation of someone stepping into water that looked colder than yesterday. The first notes were unchanged, rich, close, soft around the edges. Then the hiss settled in, wrapping the melody in its thin coat. Elena adjusted a fader, leaned back, and listened. At the 20-second mark she heard it again. Not just a breath this time. A shape. 2 syllables. Ele, na. The voice wasn't rough. It wasn't threatening. It was almost affectionate, almost the way her grandmother used to say her name when waking her gently from a nap. That was what unsettled her most, the kindness in it. She took off the headphones, set them flat on the desk, and listened to the bare room. The only sounds were the kettle's gentle simmer and her own breathing. Nothing else. The kind of silence she knew, the kind she had catalogued 100 times. She put the headphones back on. Again, the cello. Again, the hiss. And again, a voice, closer now, woven into the music as if it had always belonged. Elena. Her hand hovered over the space bar. She didn't press stop. She forced herself to sit still, breathing slowly, until the movement finished. Then she rewound. Played again. This time the whisper arrived earlier, riding under a piano chord like a passenger hiding in the shadow of someone else's stride. Elena. She saved the file and closed the project, though she hadn't done half her work. Her fingers tapped an anxious rhythm on the desk, the kind of rhythm people play when trying to pretend they aren't afraid. She stood, filled her mug with the hot water, dipped the teabag once, twice, then left it to steep untouched. For the first time in years, she didn't record a minute of room tone before she left. The drive home was usually a clean wash of noise, the radio low, the tires humming, the city's breathing a comfort. Tonight she kept the radio off. She wanted pure silence, to prove to herself that silence still belonged to her. But halfway down 9th Street, a faint murmur rose from the speakers. She glanced at the console, the radio was off, the volume at 0. Still, she heard something beneath the low hiss of static. Shapes of words. The suggestion of a name. Elena. She gripped the wheel tighter, turned the knobs, slapped the button to cut power altogether. The murmur faded. For 3 blocks she allowed herself to believe she had imagined it. Then the traffic light turned red. She stopped, breathing slow, willing calm. That was when the heater fan gave a soft shudder and exhaled a sound too round, too human to be mechanical. Elena. She drove the rest of the way with the fan off, the windows cracked to let in winter air sharp enough to sting. Home was supposed to be better. Her small apartment knew her, fit her, held her. She closed the door, leaned against it, and listened. The refrigerator hummed steadily. Pipes ticked in the walls. The ordinary domestic orchestra. She made herself tea and carried it into the bedroom. She left the lights dim, the kind of dim that suggests rest. For a while she read, or tried to, eyes skimming lines that refused to stick. She set the book aside and listened to the apartment's quiet. But the quiet wasn't right. There was something beneath it, a layering. Not loud. Not distinct. Just a thin thread running under everything else. She lay back against the pillow and closed her eyes. The sound followed. Not from the fridge, not from the heater, not from the street outside. It was in the silence itself, in the space between her breaths. Elena. She pressed her palms over her ears. The sound didn't stop. It was inside now, soft as her own pulse. Her heartbeat answered it, steady, rhythmic, faithful. For a long moment she listened to the two sounds together, her heart and the whisper. Two metronomes in a darkened room. She told herself it was fine. She told herself sound couldn't hurt. She told herself she was tired, that fatigue made patterns out of nothing. But in the quiet corner of her mind, a thought pressed forward and wouldn't leave. What if the silence isn't silence anymore? Chapter 4, The Filter. In the morning, she let daylight do what daylight does best, make small things smaller. She made tea, answered 2 emails, returned a polite call from the conservatory, and told herself the night had been a long hallway that simply felt longer than usual. By dark, the studio had its familiar posture again. Lamps, not overheads. Console lit like a quiet city scene from far away. Elena sat, breathed once, and opened the project. The waveforms waited where she'd left them, patient as handwriting in a notebook. She decided to do the practical thing. Noise reduction. Careful. Minimal. She captured a hiss print from a section of room. She set the threshold modestly. She narrowed the bands until they felt like thread through a needle, not a net over a lake. The cello sighed in, the piano followed, the hiss settled. She toggled the filter on and off with her finger hovering over the key. On, the air cleared slightly, like a window wiped with the heel of a hand. Off, everything returned to its gentle blur. Good, she said softly, mostly to herself, partly to the room. She nudged the reduction 1 notch deeper. Not much. Barely anything. The moment she pressed play, the whole field of sound seemed to rearrange itself, quiet folding, then tightening, as if all the small noises had taken a step backward at once. The music came forward, closer than before. For 2 bars it was better, bright and tender. Then the whispers lifted their heads. Not loud, not like a shout. Louder the way fog is louder than clear air, more present, more there. They rose out of the floor and threaded under the bow, widening, gathering, like the first ripples when a boat passes far out on a lake. Elena. The meters blushed into yellow. Not red. Not a scream, not in this room. More like pressure. As if the space itself were interested now and leaning closer to hear what she would do next. She stopped. Let the sound expire the way breath does when no one claims it. She turned the reduction down. Pressed play. The whisper stepped back, but it was still there, still tidy, still certain. She turned it down again. It stayed. The cello grew softer with it. The music began to thin. She pulled the filter off entirely and watched the hiss rush back in like air through an open door. With the noise returned to its original, ordinary coat, the whisper softened to a thread again, but not gone. Not pretending. She tried another tool, one she'd used for a decade with trust, a spectral repair, a tiny brush to coax a small piece of sound to behave like its neighbors. She circled half a second under the note and smoothed. Pressed play. The note held. The room exhaled. And then, with the patience of a tide, the same 2 syllables pooled in the hollow she'd made and lay there with a quiet satisfaction. Elena took the headphones off and placed them gently on the desk, the way you might put a sleeping bird back into its nest. She sat with her hands flat on the console to feel something solid. It was not anger she felt. Not fear, quite. Just the recognition that she had come to the limit of a familiar tool and the sound on the other side had no interest in being managed. She listened to the room without any help. The air was good. The lights were steady. Outside the double doors, the hall slept like a library. She pressed the talkback button and spoke to the booth, out of habit, out of kindness. That's enough for tonight, she said, the same way she might say it to a student who has played well, and well past tired. No answer, of course. Only the booth's comfortable quiet, which she knew intimately and suddenly did not entirely trust. She saved. She stood. She left the room as she had found it, lamps, not overheads, wires sleeping where they slept, the small light on the hanging mic making its patient circle on the floor. On her way out, she paused in the hallway and listened hard enough to hear the building's old bones settle. For a moment it almost sounded like music deciding whether to continue. She went home slowly. She did not turn the radio on. She did not need a test tonight. She wanted the sound of tires and wind and the small hush the dashboard makes when you don't ask anything of it. At home, she put her phone face down. She ate a little. She laid the wool blanket over her legs and let wait become an answer. When she finally turned off the last lamp, the apartment was a held breath. Sleep came the way fog comes over water, without drama, until you realize everything is inside it. In the hour before dawn, a voice near and nowhere spoke her name once, gently, like someone testing a new instrument to see if it's in tune. She did not wake. The sound slid into her dream as a ripple slides under a boat, and the boat moved on, and the water closed. Chapter 5, Carrie Morning made a case for daylight again, and she agreed with it. She did the ordinary things. Small chores with their faithful rewards. The studio would come later, for now there was the clean palette of day. On the drive-in, she allowed herself the radio very low, classical on a station she trusted, a human voice in between that never rushed. The announcer said the name of a composer as if tasting the syllables before offering them to anyone else. Elena liked that. Care was a sound, too. She parked, unlocked, and let the door ease shut behind her with its usual decisions about how a door should close. The work felt different now that she knew the whisper would not be negotiated with, only witnessed. She leaned into the other tasks, declicks, slip edits, softening a chair's small complaint. Every quieting of something ordinary felt like sweeping a floor before company comes. The whisper belonged to its own weather, she would keep the rest of the room tidy. Late in the session, curious but careful, she recorded a minute of the studio's silence without any project open, not even a new file. Just the raw input monitoring, a thing she rarely used. She closed her eyes and listened to the air as it passed through the preamps, to the way dust has an almost sound when a beam of light takes interest in it. There was nothing there but the kind of hush she could have described by touch alone. She felt almost relieved as she shut the system down. But the car has its own ways of speaking. Halfway home, at a red light, with the radio off and the fan on its lowest breath, the vent sighed a syllable that was not air. Elena. She watched her breath fog the windshield for a second and then become glass again. Not tonight, she said softly. The light changed. The car obeyed. The apartment met her with its regular choir, pipes ticking, neighbor laughing once into a phone then moving to another room. The heater drifted into life. She stirred soup on the stove, slow circles, patient heat. She ate at the little table she chose for its roundness, because a round table has no corners for thoughts to stick in. The microwave's clock blinked quietly, a soft green pulse. When she passed it to put her bowl in the sink, the machine made the faintest sound, not mechanical, not the relay, not the transformer, something closer to a voice trying on the shape of a word before deciding whether to keep it. She wiped the counter. She wiped it again, for the comfort of the motion, not the shine. In bed, she tried a trick her first recording professor had taught her on long days: listen to the room until you can hear the space between your breaths, then the tiny echo of your own heartbeat in your inner ear, then the soft settling of each muscle as it chooses to be heavier. The trick had always worked, a staircase made of smaller and smaller steps down into a good kind of nothing. Tonight, she reached the step where her breath and her heartbeat kept time with each other, and found another sound waiting there at the landing. It was not loud. It was not angry. It was not even urgent. It was simply there, like steam on a mirror, like a voice rehearsing somewhere far away, getting ready, deciding. Elena, it said, once. Nah, it said, later. Here, it tried, soft as a hand on a table. The words did not pierce. They laid themselves on the bedclothes and stared at the ceiling the way she did, companionably, as if they had nowhere else to be. She turned to her side and pulled the blanket against the hollow of her stomach and let warmth make its small case for itself. She slept, and the sound slept beside her without sleeping at all. Chapter 6. The old room. There was a person she trusted with sound the way some people trust a doctor with a heartbeat. His name was Marco Alvarez, 80 if he was a day, retired from the public radio station after 40 years tuning other people's voices until they believed in them again. He still consulted, still taught a seminar once a semester, still moved like a man who believed a room could be made kinder if you balanced it correctly. She called him on a Wednesday afternoon when the city was bright and ordinary, and asked if he might have an hour to listen to something strange. He said yes in the tone of a person who has always said yes to good questions. His place was an old storefront he had turned into a listening room, tall ceiling, books, a tape deck that looked museum-ready, speakers placed with a geometry that made the air seem square and true. He made tea without asking what kind, and they sat without rush. "Tell me first without letting me hear it," he said. "Describe it the way you might describe a stranger on a train." She did. Not with drama. With care. The lag that became a word, the word that became her name. The filters that made it step forward. The car. The kitchen. The spaces between her breath. He nodded when she finished, the way an engineer nods when the pattern in a waveform has declared itself. "We have names for parts of this," he said. "Our brains are brilliant at finding faces in clouds, voices in noise. Pareidolia, apophenia. Fatigue makes the brain generous with meanings. But this does not sound only like that." "It's not frightening," Elena said, surprising herself by how much she wanted him to know that. "It's not malicious. Not everything unusual means harm." He smiled. It made his eyes kind. "Let's listen. If it's only a cloud, we'll learn something about weather. If it's more, we'll still learn." She set her drive on the table like a small animal that must be convinced the hand reaching toward it is friendly. She opened the project. She found the markers, wisp_1, wisp_2, and queued one up. They listened. The cello walked in. The piano followed. The hiss laid down its coat. Marco smiled once at the melody for the pleasure of it and then went still the way a very good listener does, with his attention like a calm hand on the back of a chair. At the place she had marked, he lifted one finger slightly, as if to say, "There." He said nothing. He rolled back. He listened again. "Could be breath," he murmured. "Could be a bench. Could be the building. Could be you wanting breath. Could be." His voice was soft, a cushion for the words to land on. He gestured for another. She clicked to the later marker. "Elena," the recording said, barely. Elena sat very still. Marco sat very still. The room pressed no opinion on them. After a third pass he leaned back. "You notice how it settles where the music opens a little space?" he asked. "How polite it is. No overlap. No tripping the player?" "I noticed," she said, grateful to be believed in the small observation. "Let's try something," he said. He opened a new track in his old software and recorded a minute of the room with everything on and nothing playing. Only the air through the speakers, the tiny hum in the wires. He stopped. He played it back. It was only the plainly beautiful hush of a well-balanced space. He smiled. "Good. My ghosts are at lunch." He had her play the same spots again, but this time he asked her to set the noise reduction not deeper, but just wrong, to carve out a frequency where nothing lived, to lean heavily on a band that didn't need it. The room sound became thinner. The hiss changed shape. The name did not leave. It reformed exactly where the music allowed it, in the way water finds the same path through sand no matter how you drag your finger across it. He made a small, approving sound. "Then you see," he said. "Your tools don't teach it manners. It already has some." He closed his eyes and listened to her name one more time as if it were a bell far away and he were counting how long the ring takes to fade. When the sound had entirely gone, he poured more tea. "Two possibilities," he said quietly. "One belongs to the ordinary world, fatigue, expectation, a mind doing what minds do so well, turning noise into pattern. The other belongs to the large bag I call the part we do not know the names for. If it lives in that bag, you must decide how close you want to stand to it. I don't feel in danger, she said. I just feel accompanied. He considered that and nodded. Companionship is a kind of sound. So is fear. If the sound in your life begins to choose for you, then it has grown too loud. He wrote on a scrap of paper the way older men do, with a careful fountain pen. Sleep. Walk. Count breath. Touch wood, fabric, something made by a hand you know. Keep your meals. Don't listen for it, let it come to you if it comes. And if your name moves from the tape into your walls, call me and we will hear it together. He folded the paper once and slid it across the table. He did not ask to keep a copy of her files. He did not suggest she leave them. He stood, and because he was the kind of man he was, he walked her to the door as if the door needed a witness to learn how to close gently. On the sidewalk, the city made its friendly winter noises, buses, shoes, wind scuffing leaves along a curb. She breathed with it. She felt better in the way you feel better when someone's old room has reminded you that rooms can be kind. On the drive home she allowed the radio again, low. A woman's voice introduced a nocturne as if the word itself could be a blanket. At the first red light, the speaker sighed her name so softly it could have been the sound a finger makes tracing a circle on a cold window. Elena. She did not turn the radio off. She did not test or measure. She breathed in for 4, held for 7, let go for 8, and watched the signal change. The apartment door closed with its reliable click. Inside, she followed Marco's paper as if it were a recipe: food, water, fabric, wood, breath. She turned the microwave's face to the wall without thinking about why. She paused in the middle of the room with her hand on the back of a chair and felt the chair's simple, true weight. When she finally lay down, the whisper arrived late, like a friend who knows your door is rarely locked and chooses to knock anyway. Elena, it said, from nowhere, from everywhere, in a voice that had learned her name by practicing in the spaces she gave it. Her heartbeat answered with its soft, patient syllable. Yes, said the heart. Yes, said the breath. And the night, pleased with the arrangement, continued. Chapter 7. Fractals of quiet days became a braid of ordinary and odd, a pattern that held if you touched it lightly. She worked in the mornings with the window cracked a finger's width, letting air write its soft S on the edge of the room. In the afternoons she walked the long block that had the trees which kept a little of their brown leaves all winter, whispering to each other in the kind of language leaves speak. She cooked, not because she was hungry, but because the slow rhythms of stirring and tasting build shelters inside ours. She slept when sleep agreed to meet her. The whisper, her name, stayed patient. It never shoved. It never startled. It preferred the thresholds and the rests, the moment after a page is turned but before the eye finds the next line, the small valley between inhale and exhale when a body forgets itself and becomes only breath. She began a notebook, as Marco would have wanted. Not a log, which can feel like evidence, but a small garden of observations. Kitchen, 11:10 p.m. Heater turned on and took my name with it for one syllable. Bedroom, 3:18 a.m. Heard L, but might have been the radiator deciding to count. Studio, noon, nothing but the hiss behaving. Writing it made it smaller. She did not write fear into the margins. She just kept the shapes. In the studio, the whisper learned new places to rest. It stepped out from under the cello and tried the benches between phrases, as if testing how far from music it could be and still be itself. Once, as she trimmed a tiny stumble in the pianist's left hand, it placed a single, gnaw in the exact breath after the edit, as if to approve the small mercy. She found that she could go whole minutes without listening for it, and then when it arrived, she could say in her head, hello, the way you say hello to a bird that returns to the same wire every dusk. At night, the apartment learned to hold both kinds of quiet, the old kind, made of pipes and neighbors, and the new kind, made of attentions. Elena would lie on her side and let her breath undo the day in calm knots. Somewhere beyond the edges of hearing, a sound like the idea of a voice would form and then, obediently, not insist. Sometimes the sound tried other words, the way a singer warms up by leaning gently on vowels. Here, it would say. Near. Listen. Not commands. Invitations shaped out of air. If she ignored them, if she simply placed her hand on the wood of the headboard and counted 1, 2, 3, 4, they faded like the rings on water after a stone has decided it has been a stone enough for one day. Once, around 3 in the morning, she woke to her heart beating a little slower than usual, that heavy, honeyed pace a body takes when a dream asks it to stay wrapped a moment longer. She lay still and listened to the space between beats, a silver line she had never noticed with such care. In that line, the whisper hid, then emerged, then hid again, as if playing a game children play with their faces behind their hands. Her breath adapted. It made room. The beat held. Nothing terrible happened. She slept again, and the sound did what sound does when not asked to prove itself. It became part of the room and then forgot it had ever been separate. In the morning she wrote, heard my name between heartbeats. Gentle. Not mine and mine. She poured tea. Steam made a small cloud and then found the window and became small water there. The city did its weekday music. She dressed, wrapped a scarf once around her neck and once more, and left the apartment with the surety of a person who knows both the road under her shoes and the air around her head are doing their jobs well. On the sidewalk, a man talking into a headset laughed softly, then said into the air, I hear you. I hear you just fine. Elena smiled, because she did, too. Chapter 8, Between Heartbeats. The first time Elena truly worried was when her own body joined the chorus. It was late. She had left the studio early, unable to concentrate on the cello's second movement. Instead she sat at her kitchen table with the lamp dimmed to a golden pool, notebook open, pen idle. The refrigerator murmured in its patient rhythm. The radiator ticked a little at the seams. She counted her breath, as Marco had told her. 4 in. 7 hold. 8 out. She reached for the steadiness of it. But between those counts she heard something else. Not a whisper from the room, not from the microwave, not from the heater. From herself. Her pulse. It slowed, just slightly, still safe, still steady, but with long pauses between, as if listening. And in the space where a beat ought to fall, the whisper answered. Elena. Not loud. Not cruel. As intimate as the sound a mouth makes leaning close against a collar. She pressed her hand to her chest and felt the thump arrive late, as if waiting for its cue. Her throat grew tight. Don't, she whispered into the lamp's small circle of light. Don't do that. Her voice sounded strange to her, as if borrowed from somewhere else. She went to bed early that night, lying very still, trying to let her body forget the idea of sound. Eventually it did, though in her dreams she walked through hallways that seemed to breathe with her. When she woke at dawn, her heart was back to its proper rhythm, steady and untroubled. She wrote in the notebook, heartbeat slower, voice inside the pause. Not threatening. Not mine either. Chapter 9, The studio turns. The studio had always been a friend to her, a room she trusted more than her own bedroom. Now, when she unlocked the door, it felt like a place that had begun to think its own thoughts. The lamps came on, but the light seemed thinner. The console greeted her with the soft glow of its LEDs, but the rows of meters flickered once as if already listening. She ran her hand across the faders and felt the faint vibration of electricity in her fingertips. She opened the project. The cello sang. The pianist breathed. The hiss wore its usual coat. She began her passes, smoothing, trimming. Half an hour later she noticed something new. In the empty tracks, the ones she had not armed, the ones with nothing on them, small green meters had begun to twitch. Not constantly. Just a pulse here and there, like someone tapping a finger on a desk in another room. She stared. Tapped the space bar. Stopped playback. The meters froze. She pressed play again. The cello returned. The hiss returned. And underneath, the blank channels twitched to life again, keeping time with nothing she could see. Elena. She lifted the headphones away from her ears and set them on the desk. The sound did not stop. It filled the room itself now, faint but certain. Not in her head. Not in the wires. In the air, like dust taking on the shape of a voice. Her hand hovered over the console. She pressed record on one of the empty tracks, just to see. The waveform began to scroll across the screen. Not flat, not empty. A jagged line rose and fell as though 100 tiny mouths had leaned toward the microphone that was not armed. She stopped the recording and played it back. At first only hiss. Then, faint but undeniable, "We are here." Not one voice. Many, layered together. Gentle, insistent, practiced. She closed the project. Shut the system down. The fan spun to silence, but the air in the room did not feel silent anymore. It felt like a chest still rising and falling long after the body was asleep. She left without making her minute of room tone. Chapter 10, The Escape Attempt. Jules insisted she get out of town for a night. "You need air that doesn't come with cables," Jules said. "One night. A hotel, a boring one. Room service and bad Wi-Fi. Come back when your ears belong to you again." Elena agreed. She packed a small bag, her notebook, a scarf for comfort. She booked a room in a chain hotel off the interstate, beige, predictable, the kind of place no one remembers with passion but everyone trusts for its sameness. The first hour was fine. She ate a sandwich she didn't want, watched half of a documentary, flipped through the hotel's stiff paper directory. The hum of the air conditioner was steady and anonymous. Then, lying in the white-sheeted bed, she heard it. Not from the vents. Not from the hallway. From the silence itself, the gap between the machine's low sighs. Elena. She turned on the television. Static filled the screen for half a second before the channel caught. In that half second the static formed words, or seemed to. "We are here." She sat very still, remote in hand. The program settled into a talk show rerun. The audience laughed on cue. But under the applause was a rhythm she had learned to recognize, her own name, carried on the rise and fall of 100 clapping hands. She muted the TV. The whisper filled the room as if grateful for the space. She pressed both palms flat against the bedspread, grounding herself in the scratch of the fabric, the steady weight of cotton. "No," she whispered. "Not tonight." The silence did not argue. It simply waited, as silence does, with all the time in the world. When sleep came, it was shallow and uneasy. In her dream, she sat in front of a console that stretched endlessly, faders rising and falling on their own, as if unseen hands were practicing scales. Every channel whispered at once. Every channel knew her name. She woke with her heart pounding, not fast, but too slow, each beat heavy as a drum in an empty hall. Between the beats the voices rested, patient, ready. She wrote in her notebook, "Hotel, beige, predictable." Sound followed. Silence is not silent anymore. Chapter 11, The World Without Silence. By the end of the week, Elena understood the truth, silence no longer belonged to her. It followed her everywhere, patient and invisible. In the elevator, the faint whir of cables carried her name in syllables too soft for anyone else to hear. At the cafe, the hiss of steam under the barista's hand-shaped vowels that bent toward her. Even walking down the street, the gaps between passing cars felt filled, not empty, never empty, but threaded with murmurs waiting to be noticed. She stopped trying to explain it. Jules called twice, kind and insistent, but Elena answered only with the smallest lies. "I'm resting. I'm catching up. It's better today." None of it was true. At night, the whispers grew bolder. Not just her name anymore. Other words, layered, tangled. Sometimes she thought they were sentences, but each time she leaned closer, they dissolved like chalk in water. Once, she heard laughter, not cruel, not joyous, simply aware. She tried earplugs. They dulled the world, but not the whisper. She tried music, but the voices slipped between the notes. She tried sleep with every light on, but even the hum of electricity bent to carry her name. The worst came when she sat very still one evening, notebook open, pen poised, waiting for calm. For one long minute she heard nothing. True silence. She almost wept from relief. Then, in that silence, her own thoughts betrayed her. She caught herself thinking in a voice that did not feel entirely her own. "We are here," the thought said, in her cadence, in her timbre, but with a weight that was not hers. She dropped the pen. It rolled across the table and came to rest against the edge of the paper. On the page, in her careful handwriting, the last words she had written were, "Not mine and mine." Chapter 12, The Vanishing Sound. The final night arrived without announcement. She sat in the studio one last time, unable to resist the pull. The cello track waited on the screen, glowing gently in the dim. She pressed play. The bow entered, rich and human, the pianist folded in. The hiss rose like an old friend's sigh. Then the voices came. Not faint now. Not shy. They rose behind the music, louder with each repetition, weaving sentences she could finally almost understand. "Elena. We are here. Come through. Rest." Her heart slowed, one beat, then another, each thud thick as honey. The monitors in front of her trembled with low frequency though no track was armed. She pressed her palm to her chest and felt the rhythm faltering, stretching. Between the beats, the silence filled. A silence that was not absence but presence, vast and patient, wrapping her like fabric. Her breath caught. The voices hushed. For a moment she felt as if an audience were leaning forward, waiting. Her heart beat once more. A pause. Then another, softer, farther away. The last sound she heard clearly was her own pulse, slowing, dissolving. Then, nothing. Not silence as she had once known it, but silence as something living. The studio monitors went dark. The console slept. The file reached its end. When the building's night janitor passed the door hours later, he paused, thinking he heard faint music inside, though the room was dark. He tilted his head, listening. For a moment he thought someone had spoken his name. Then he shook his head, chuckled softly at himself, and moved on. Inside, the console sat still. The air carried no hiss. Only the kind of quiet that listens, and remembers, and waits.